If you were born in Europe around the year 742, long before clocks ruled time or maps shaped borders, you would hear one name whispered with equal parts awe and fear: Karl, later known as Charlemagne. To most, he was not a man, he was an event, a storm in human form. When he marched, forests shook. When he spoke, nobles straightened their backs. But the strange truth is that the king who would shape a continent began his life in uncertainty. He wasn't even expected to rule alone. He and his brother were meant to split their father's kingdom, each inheriting half, two young rulers meant to share power. But fate, or ambition, had other plans. His brother died suddenly, and Charlemagne inherited everything. Some say it was illness. Others whisper darker possibilities. What matters is this: the crown rested on one head, and Europe would never be the same. He was not like other medieval rulers who lounged in courts. Charlemagne woke before sunrise, washed in ice-cold water, and demanded that everyone around him move quickly. He hated laziness more than he hated enemies. He ate simply: bread, roasted meat, and a cup of watered wine. No excessive feasts, no jeweled displays. He dressed in plain wool and leather. No crowns, no glowing robes. If you saw him on the road, you might think he was just another soldier, broad-shouldered, tall enough to tower over most men of his time. People described him as powerful, intimidating, and always in motion. He spent most of his life on horseback. His kingdom wasn't built at a desk. It was carved into the world by calloused hands gripping reins. His horse carried him from battlefield to battlefield, from frozen mountains to dense forests, through rain and snow. He didn't hide in the rear. He rode in front, sword raised. His men loved him for it. When Charlemagne marched, the army marched with him not out of fear, but loyalty. They saw a king who sweat, bled, and starved beside them. His presence changed battles. If you were a soldier and you looked around, exhausted and scared, knowing your king stood beside you made courage easier. Yet, his hunger for conquest was unrelenting. He waged over 50 military campaigns against Lombards in Italy, Saxons in the forests of the north, Avars on the eastern plains. He didn't just defeat enemies, he absorbed them. Each victory stretched his empire wider, shaping a territory that would one day become the roots of France, Germany, and parts of Italy. Charlemagne never called it Europe. He simply called it Christendom. He saw conquering as a divine mission. His greatest enemy was the Saxons, wild pagan tribes who lived deep in dense, misty forests. The Saxons refused to convert to Christianity. Charlemagne saw their defiance not as a choice, but as rebellion against God. The wars lasted decades, a cycle of submission, revolt, punishment, and retaliation. At one point, after yet another uprising, Charlemagne made a brutal decision. Thousands of Saxon prisoners were executed. Even his supporters had trouble justifying the bloodshed. Charlemagne believed order required force, and in his mind, Christianity and civilization were inseparable. If peace came only after violence, he accepted it. But not every part of his reign was forged with a sword. When Charlemagne wasn't fighting, he was building. He traveled with rolled-up plans and ideas sketched on parchment. He would stand on a hilltop, point with his arm, and say, "Here, build a city." He turned distant villages into thriving centers of trade. He built bridges, roads, granaries, and stunning palaces. He wanted to unify his massive kingdom not just through force, but through structure. He ordered every region to adopt the same currency. He standardized weights and measures. He wanted people from distant lands to be able to trade without confusion or scams. The idea seems obvious today. Back then, it was revolutionary. Perhaps his strangest and most brilliant obsession was education. Charlemagne, the warrior king, who spent most of his life on battlefields, decided that Europe needed schools. He invited the greatest scholars from Spain, Italy, and Britain to his court. He placed them beside warriors and generals. He demanded that priests and nobles learn to read and write. He ordered every monastery to open a school so children, even ordinary children, could learn. That idea alone changed history. Those schools, scattered across his empire, became the ancestors of Europe's universities. But here's the twist that historians love. Despite demanding literacy from others, Charlemagne struggled to read and never fully learned to write. Late at night, he practiced holding a pen, guided by tutors, but his hands were too stiff from decades of sword and reins. He was a king who built a world of knowledge from the outside, unable to unlock the door for himself. He created laws, too. Written laws, clear and organized. No more chaos, no more judgments based on one noble's whim. He wanted justice to be predictable, fair, and recorded. To prevent corruption, he sent inspectors known as missi dominici, royal messengers, who traveled around and checked whether local lords followed the rules. They questioned villagers, verified accounts, and returned to Charlemagne with reports. It was one of the earliest attempts at a functioning bureaucracy since Rome fell. The more his power grew, the more he dreamed of unity. And the church noticed. On Christmas Day in the year 800, Charlemagne attended Mass at St. Peter's in Rome. As he knelt before the altar, the Pope placed a crown on his bowed head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. The crowd erupted. The Roman Empire, silent for centuries, had found a new ruler. Charlemagne later claimed he did not expect the coronation, that he would not have entered the church if he knew. Maybe that is true, maybe it's not. Either way, the message was unmistakable. With that crown, Charlemagne became the bridge between the ancient world and the medieval world. The church gained a protector. Charlemagne gained legitimacy beyond conquest. Europe had an emperor again, but power does not protect a man from aging. In his later years, Charlemagne's hands trembled, his legs weakened. The horse that once carried him across mountains now carried him slowly through his palace courtyard. He continued working. He continued planning. He even drafted rules about how inheritance should work, so his massive empire wouldn't to fall into chaos when he died. He had watched too many kingdoms crumble because heirs fought over the remains. He died in winter, in the year 814. No battlefield, no heroic last charge. A fever, a weakening body, and a final prayer. His burial was simple, a stone tomb beneath the cathedral he had built in Aachen. No towering monument, no glowing treasures. A king who spent his life in motion was finally still. Yet centuries later, emperors searched for his body. Kings claimed his bloodline. Nations fought over his legacy. In France, he became Charles the Great. In Germany, Karl der Grosse. Historians call him the father of Europe, not because he ruled everywhere, but because he connected different tribes, languages, and cultures into the idea of a shared continent. He was a conqueror, a reformer, a visionary, and a contradiction. A man who spread learning but struggled to write. A king who dressed plainly but reshaped royalty itself. A warrior who unified through war and educated through peace. Charlemagne reminds us that history is not clean or simple. It is loud, messy, and full of imperfect humans who change the world anyway.